we heard from two of the most extraordinary partners, former Secretary of State John Kerry, and Administrator Gina McCarthy, to brief us on the administration's plans as it relates to dealing with the climate crisis, both here at home and throughout the world. And we're looking forward to partnering with them to deal with this situation that threatens our very well-being and the future of our planet. A lot of big issues for us to confront. We're serious about our work. The other side continues to play games, even though the lives and the livelihood of the American people are at stake. Shame on them, but we're going to continue to plow forward. It's now my honor to yield to one of the distinguished co-chairs of the Democratic Policy and Communications Committee, the distinguished gentleman from the great state of Colorado, Joe Neguse.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, first and foremost. This last weekend, I had an opportunity to visit with folks in my district, as did I know many of my colleagues, and the message was unmistakable. Help is here. The American Rescue Plan is working. The American Rescue Plan that we passed is working to get shots in arms, money in pockets, people in jobs, children in schools, and so much more. The United States, as you all know, has administered more than 209 million vaccine doses and counting. More than 84 million Americans are fully vaccinated. Soon, half of the adults in the U.S. will have received at least one dose. Those numbers represent grandparents hugging their grandchildren for the first time in months, if not years, parents going back to work, and teachers safely back in the classrooms. More than 159 million Americans have received an economic impact payment of up to $1,400 so far, and they are pumping that money back into our communities and into our local economies, helping businesses open their doors and get paychecks in workers' pockets. In fact, our economy added more than 1 million jobs just last month. And that's just the beginning. From the child care funding that President Biden announced last week to a new program to support restaurant jobs that the SBA began this week, to the child tax credit that will start putting money in hardworking families' pockets over the summer. The American Rescue Plan will continue making life better for the American people for months to come. And House Democrats will continue spreading the message about all the ways in which we are here to help the American people. With that, I want to turn it over to my distinguished colleague and fellow co-chair of the Democratic Policy and Communications Committee, Mr. Cartwright.
Thanks, Chair. Well said. Well, you heard the numbers, everybody. 1 million, 209 million, 159 million. These numbers don't lie. 1 million jobs added in March. 209 million vaccine doses given so far. 159 million economic impact payments going to regular people around this country. And every single number that Joe just cited represents a worker, a family, a business owners who's better today in their business than it was before we passed the American Rescue Plan. This is the American Rescue Plan working, and it's working on an individual basis. Joe's right. We were back in our districts last week, and we were talking to people about how these things are working. I talk to people. I have Monroe County, Pennsylvania in my district. Patrick from Monroe County used his $1,400 check to pay down credit card debt. Anne Marie from Lackawanna County, where Scranton is, was able to buy prescription medications that were not covered by her insurance. John from Luzerne County, where Wilkes-Barre is, said it helped him make ends meet after being laid off. These are actual impacts of the American Rescue Plan. And I want to quote from a lady named Alicia from Pittston in Luzerne County. She wrote to me and she said this: as a northeastern Pennsylvania native growing up in Pittston, the one thing I loved about growing up here was learning the value of hard work. No matter what life has thrown at me, it was instilled in me that hard work does pay off. As a Latina woman in the workforce, I worked hard as my life led me to become a single mom, then a stepmom with a blended multicultural family and raising children with special needs. I hold many facets of being a working parent. Although my personal working motherhood journey had many obstacles at times, nothing could have prepared me and many other parents for the balancing act of raising your children and working from home while your children are trying to learn remotely. The American Rescue Plan ensured that relief reach working people and communities in Pennsylvania. That's what Alicia wrote to me. Ladies and gentlemen, the American Rescue Plan is working. We're looking at a bright future in this country because of that plan working. I want to turn it over to my distinguished colleague, Debbie Dingell from Michigan.
Thank you, Matt. I'm from Michigan. You don't take your mask off even if you've been vaccinated. The surge is real, and we can't get COVID fatigue. Your PSA from Michigan this morning. But I want to thank Matt for what he and Joe just said. What they outlined, help is here. But Democrats are just getting started in our work to create good paying jobs and support the American worker. As Vice President Harris said yesterday in North Carolina, the American Jobs Plan will create millions of jobs, good jobs for everyday working people everywhere. It'll create jobs rebuilding our roads and our bridges, upgrading our infrastructure to ensure kids have clean drinking water. It's going to take care of broadband so that people in urban and rural areas have access to it. Being from Michigan, of course, I have to talk about how it will revitalize manufacturing. It'll secure our U.S. supply chain. Don't you think PPE taught us about national security issues and having to depend on another country? It will invest in R&D, and we will create the jobs of the future. We will, as we build out the electric vehicle infrastructure, we will have new jobs so that people have good paying jobs. And it'll give mom and dads who work for their living the support that they need to build a better life for their families. Matt shared the story of Alicia. I'd like to see any hard-working mom like Alicia look them in the eye and have somebody tell them that child care is an infrastructure, or that long-term care is an infrastructure. We are one of the only industrialized nations in the world that doesn't take care of its seniors. That's a moral issue. People who work for a living know that being able to care for your kids and your parents is an absolutely essential to have the ability to work hard and build a better life for your family. And that's what the American Jobs Plan is about, building back better for the people. And with that, I return it to Chairman Jeffries.
I thank our distinguished co-chairs from the DPCC for their continued work. I was going to take my mask off, but I don't want to get in trouble with the distinguished gentlelady from Michigan, so we'll just open it up for questions.
Sir, I wanted to ask you, Kevin McCarthy is likely to try to censure Representative Waters tomorrow. I'm curious if you think any Democrats will be supporting that, and if you all will move to table that.
I certainly will not support that frivolous resolution, and I think that Chairwoman Waters has made clear, certainly the perspective of the House Democratic Caucus is clear. We support peaceful protests consistent with the First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, and the right to petition the government peacefully. That is what we continue to support. Now, Kevin McCarthy should focus on his own conference, because the Republicans in the House are a mess right now. Perhaps he should sit this one out. When you think that Kevin McCarthy has the nerve to say something about anyone, when he supported the violent insurrection after the mob attacked the Capitol, threatened to assassinate Nancy Pelosi, kill other members of Congress, hang Mike Pence. He then came back to the Capitol, voted to support the big lie, which ignited the violent insurrection, and continues to play footsie with Donald Trump. When you've got a situation where Lauren Boebert is a mess, Matt Gaetz is a mess, Marjorie Taylor Greene is a mess. Clean up your mess, Kevin. Sit this one out. You've got no credibility here. We support peaceful protests.
May I follow up just very quickly? Do you support what Representative Waters said, her words?
To be honest, I'm not that familiar with what she said. I know she made clear in comments afterward that she supports peaceful protests. Dr. King supported nonviolent direct action. That is what House Democrats support.
To follow up on Jessica there, but was it appropriate to go to Minnesota, a place that's kind of like a tinderbox, people are walking on eggshells right now, and say something that could cause a situation to maybe combust and maybe get a little bit worse? Even the judge admonished her words and how she said them.
I didn't really see what the judge had to say. Not clear that that was even an appropriate statement by the judge, but Matt Cartwright perhaps may have something to say on this. He's one of our most august trial lawyers, as well as Joe Neguse. But, I mean, I think, listen, when I was at home this weekend, here's what I heard about. We've experienced a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, a lot of death, a lot of hurt, a lot of heartache as a result of all of the crises that have afflicted America over the last year or so, including the pandemic, which we are still working hard to emerge from. And as Debbie indicated, that's what we're focused on. The American Rescue Plan, the American Jobs Plan, and dealing with the racial justice crisis in a responsible fashion, which is what House Democrats have done. We passed the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act because we have a problem that we have to deal with. The majority of police officers that I interact with at home are hardworking public servants. They are there to protect and serve. But we also have a police violence problem, a police brutality problem, a problem with the police use of excessive force that we need to deal with in a transformational way that brings about sustainable change. That is what the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act is all about. That is where our focus is as legislators, and that's where I think it will continue to be. Anyone?
Sure.
Debbie? Joe? Oh, okay.
We talk about a transformational change, say, in policing. Can you please define that? You're talking about applying, say, critical race theory, for example, in policing. Can you define that?
Yeah, what is critical race theory?
Well, actually, can you tell me?
You asked me the question.
No, I'm asking you.
Okay, you asked me the question, so I'm asking you what's critical race theory.
I'm asking you, actually. Can you define that, and is that being applied, for example, in policing?
Can you cite the words critical race theory in the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act? Thousands of words in that bill. Does it appear?
No, I'm asking you.
I'm wondering because you asked me a question, so I'm just trying to get clarification.
I actually want to know, can you tell me what exactly is transformational police, what exactly is transformation in policing? And are you applying, for example, the whole term critical race theory in policing?
Yeah, transformational policing, as defined by the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, which I think is urgently necessary, includes several different provisions. Overall, it involves trying to change the mindset of policing from a warrior mentality that exists amongst some to a guardian mentality. The problem is that when you have a warrior mentality that clearly exists amongst some, then you tend to view certain communities, communities of color, black communities, Latino communities, low-income communities of every race, including in rural America and in Appalachia and in small-town America, as enemy combatants when you have a warrior mentality. And as a result of that, you see things like a knee to someone's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, people getting shot in the back, young boys like Tamir Rice being killed instantaneously while playing in a park, Breonna Taylor killed while sleeping because a no-knock warrant was erroneously executed. That's a warrior mentality. We want to change that to a guardian mentality, which is embraced by organizations like the Fraternal Order of Police, which views policing through the lens of partnerships between law enforcement and the communities that they represent to lift up public safety for everyone. That's transformational policing. That's what the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act is all about.
Mr. Chairman, one more question about Congresswoman Waters. Earlier this year, there was a push among your members of your own caucus to censure Congresswoman Green. That was set aside by the Speaker. If the Republicans move forward with the censure of Chairman Waters, do you think that should be revisited and bring back the Marjorie Taylor Greene censure resolution?
No, I think we have to deal with each issue as it presents itself to us. We acted with respect to Marjorie Taylor Greene in a bipartisan way in terms of removing someone from her committees because of her reckless, unrepentant behavior. And by the way, while we're on the subject of Marjorie Taylor Greene, since nobody has saw fit to bring this up, I'm shocked that the House Republicans apparently were plotting to form a Jim Crow KKK-like caucus. That should shock the conscience of every American. Not just every Black American, every white American, every Latino American, every Asian American, every Native American, all Americans. Why? Because the motto of this country is e pluribus unum. Out of many, we are one. Not out of many Anglo-Saxons, not out of many Europeans, not out of many Confederate sympathizers. Out of many, we are one. That is what makes America a great country. The gorgeous mosaic of people who have come to us from all across the world. That's what American exceptionalism is all about. And so again, perhaps Kevin McCarthy should sit this one out because he's got zero moral standing. Clean up your own mess while we as House Democrats are working to clean up the mess that has been inflicted upon the American people as a result of a once-in-a-century pandemic, which is why we've acted with a once-in-a-century transformative bill, the American Rescue Plan, to crush the virus, provide direct relief and money in the pockets of everyday Americans, and lay the foundation to ultimately supercharge the economy and build back better for the people. That's what House Democrats will continue to work on because that's what the American people want us to do. That's what they want us to do. And that's what we're going to continue to do.
To follow up, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate you. My follow-up was going to be about that caucus, and thank you for addressing that. I want to ask you another thing. There are a lot of Americans waiting for this verdict in Minnesota with a lot of anticipation, a lot of dread, and I just wondered, do you have any words for the American people on ahead of that verdict on what is appropriate and what not be an appropriate way to react?
Well, our system is not a perfect one, but it is the system of justice that we have that allows for a prosecution and a vigorous defense. We've seen both. In my humble opinion, George Floyd was murdered on that street corner in Minneapolis. I think the overwhelming majority of the American people believe that to be the case. It's my hope that the jury will return a verdict commensurate with what we've seen. And if we don't have that verdict, then we are going to continue to fight for liberty and justice for all in the appropriate way, in the democratic way, in the legislative way, in the way that is consistent with nonviolent direct action, peaceful protest embedded in the principles of the First Amendment: freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of expression, and the right to petition our government. America is not a perfect country. The framers weren't perfect, but they did promise us a march toward a more perfect union. And whatever happens in Minnesota, We, as House Democrats, are going to continue that long, necessary, and majestic march toward a more perfect union. Last question. Debbie.
I want to comment. I am tired, and I think it is wrong in this country.
Debbie, Mike.
Mike. I keep my distance if you're in Michigan. I am tired of people pitting racial justice against public safety. It is a false choice. You can have both. And this is an opportunity in our country to have an uncomfortable conversation. We need to work together. I spent all day yesterday, the sheriff of Washtenaw County is a black sheriff. And we, quite frankly, during the elections, people were scared to death that the militia were going to come in and take over some of the cities. Now we have people that are very worried. They're worried about what's going to happen. And listen, I sit in classes that are taught in Washtenaw County for young black men about what to do if you are stopped by the police. We have to teach courses like that, and that should bother every single American. But I said goodbye to a hero in this Capitol last week who kept us safe, who protected democracy. Last summer, when this was going on, I had a son of Dearborn, a 26-year-old policeman, who during Ramadan, it's Ramadan now, during Ramadan last year, predicted or talked to his family, if I die, I want you to know that I became a policeman because I believe in community and protecting it. And on the 4th of July, he was shot and killed when responding to an incident in a home. He was a Toledo policeman and responding to a Home Depot drunk driving. We have people that are working every day to keep us safe, and there's some bad ones in there. But I am tired of people making us make false choices. We have to have, when I look at Wisconsin and I see a black man shot in the back 8 times and a 17-year-old white boy walk down the street with an assault weapon who killed 2 people and not be stopped and offered a bottle of water, okay, we got a problem in this country. But we gotta stop taking paintbrushes and painting everybody and letting ourselves be falsely pitted. We need racial justice and we need public safety. And we need to work together. We need to listen to each other. We need to sit down in communities, respect each other, have civil dialogue, and find the solutions. We can't put blinders on, and we've got to work together. And I hope that this country, we are as worried, and I don't want to say the word because I don't want to stir them up. But I've had men in front of my house with assault weapons, and trust me, they weren't young black men. We don't worry about the hate and fear dividing this country, and may this be a moment that we all take a deep breath, think about what's happening in this country, and try to bring ourselves together. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. Last question.
Thank you, Chairman. 9/11 seemed to bring Congress together, but January 6th has caused a greater divide among lawmakers, some Democrats refusing to work with Republicans that voted to object. How does this body move forward?
Well, the January 6th attack on the Capitol is a day that is going to continue to live in infamy. All of us personally lived through it. It was an attack on the Constitution, an attack on the Congress, an attack on the Capitol, an attack on our way of life. Some of my Republican colleagues view it as such, including the courageous ones that voted to hold the former president accountable. Others continue to bury their heads in the sand or provide aid and comfort to the insurrectionists. I'm not angry about that. I'm hurt. I'm saddened. I'm pained by the inability of some of my colleagues to actually come together in the aftermath of such a devastating attack on all we should be about as Americans. But yet and still, we continue to move forward. We continue to put forward bipartisan bills. The overwhelming majority of the bills that pass this chamber continue to receive strong bipartisan support from both sides of the aisle. And so we're going to continue to come together where we can, and hopefully to agree to disagree without being disagreeable when we must. At the same time, the Speaker and Chairman Benny Thompson are working hard to come to an agreement on a bipartisan commission that can take an objective look at the events of January 6th with experts in academia, in the law, and law enforcement, and national security community, Democrats and Republicans, who can come together, as we did after September 11th, examine what happened, report to the Congress, and most importantly to the American people, and to figure out how do we stop that type of violent insurrection and the radicalization that fueled it from ever happening again in these great United States of America. Thank you, everyone.